Imagine walking into a courtroom, your stomach in knots, your life unraveling, thinking this judge is going to destroy what little you have left. But instead of punishment, you get a pause and a question. What's really going on in your life? This is the story of a judge who didn't just hand out sentences. She handed out second chances. She walked into the courtroom like she wanted to disappear. Ava Evans, 15 years old, shoulders curled in, hoodie too big, backpack torn and patched with duct tape. She didn't look like a criminal. She looked like someone who hadn't been seen in a long time. The bailiff called her name. She didn't even flinch. Her public defender gave her a light nudge forward, and Ava shuffled to the front of the courtroom like a ghost in sneakers. The charge? Petty theft. 2 spiral notebooks and a used calculator, shoplifted from a drugstore down the block from her school. To most people in the room, it was routine. Another bad kid. Another case to process and move along. But Judge Ellis didn't just glance at the file. She looked at Ava, not as a number, not as a statistic, but as a girl who was scared, silent, and standing alone in front of the system. "Miss Evans," the judge said softly, "do you understand why you're here today?" Ava nodded. "And can you tell me, in your own words, why you took those things?" A pause, the kind of pause that told you this wasn't defiance, it was fear. Then Ava finally whispered, "My teacher said if I failed the next test, I'd fail the class. I didn't have a calculator or any clean pages left in my notebook." Someone in the gallery sighed like they'd heard it all before. But Judge Ellis didn't sigh. She leaned forward. "And why didn't you ask for help?" Ava shrugged. "I didn't think anyone would care." Silence. The prosecutor started flipping through papers, clearly ready to push for community service and a warning on Ava's record. But Judge Ellis didn't pick up her gavel. She picked up a small canvas bag next to her chair. Inside it, school supplies, 2 brand new notebooks, a scientific calculator, pens, pencils, even highlighters. She placed the bag on the edge of the bench. "Miss Evans," she said, "you were wrong about one thing. Someone does care." Ava looked up for the first time. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. Not yet. "I'm not giving you a punishment," the judge said. "I'm giving you an assignment. 20 hours of tutoring younger students at your school library." The prosecutor looked confused. So did the clerk. But the judge didn't break eye contact with Ava. "You already knew the right answers," she said. "You just didn't have the tools." Ava took the bag with both hands like it weighed 100 pounds. Not because of the notebooks, but because it felt like, for the first time, someone had handed her dignity. And as she turned to leave the courtroom, she didn't walk like a ghost anymore. She walked like someone who had been seen. His shoes were too worn for court. That's what Judge Ellis noticed first. They were old leather loafers, cracked near the toes and softened by decades of walking. He shuffled slowly to the defendant's table, gripping a folded envelope in one hand and a small prescription bottle in the other. "Mr. Henry Watkins," the bailiff announced. The man nodded politely, blinking under the fluorescent lights. The prosecutor didn't even open a file. "Your Honor, Mr. Watkins has ignored 3 notices for an unpaid parking ticket, dating back almost a year. We request standard fines and penalties." Judge Ellis didn't respond right away. She was looking at the envelope, the way he held it, like it was something fragile, something he didn't want to let go of. "Mr. Watkins," she said softly, "why didn't you pay the ticket when it was issued?" He cleared his throat. "After my wife passed, I had trouble keeping up with things. I paid what I could, but sometimes I have to choose." He held up the small orange bottle. "This, or the meter." The room went still. Judge Ellis didn't need a long explanation. She'd seen this before. People quietly breaking under the weight of systems that never paused to ask why. But she still asked, "How much was the ticket?" $63, the prosecutor replied. "With fees, it's now—" $63 is fine," she interrupted gently. She turned to Mr. Watkins. "I won't waive it, but I won't make you pay in dollars either. Do you still garden?" He looked surprised. "Yes, ma'am. My wife and I, well, we used to. We grew tomatoes every spring." "There's a community garden across town," the judge continued. They grow produce for the food bank. Could you give them a few Saturdays? The old man smiled and for the first time since entering, stood a little straighter. I'd be honored. Judge Ellis nodded. Then your balance is cleared. The prosecutor looked baffled. The clerk was smiling. And Mr. Watkins? He walked out of that courtroom not as a violator, but as a man with purpose. He showed up that weekend with gloves so old the leather had turned soft as cloth. He taught teenagers how to prune tomato plants and told stories about soil like it was scripture. 3 weeks later, he came back to the courthouse, not for a hearing, but with a basket full of bright red tomatoes, harvested from the same seeds he'd planted in grief. He placed them gently on the court clerk's desk and said, "For the staff." But Judge Ellis got the ripest one, and she didn't just eat it. She sliced it, added olive oil, basil, and salt, and served it in the break room with a smile. Because sometimes justice doesn't end with a fine, it ends with a tomato that tastes like dignity. The waiting room was quiet, not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful, the kind that feels heavy, like everyone's holding their breath, waiting to hear whether their life is about to break in half. Celeste Carter sat in the corner, cradling her son Milo, who had finally fallen asleep against her chest. She rocked him gently, counting the seconds between each breath. She was next on the docket. Her case wasn't criminal. It was custody. Social services had flagged her for missed appointments, too many days at the shelter, too many late forms, and now someone had decided she might not be fit to keep her son. She had no lawyer, just a stack of crumpled paperwork in a plastic grocery bag and the weight of every failure she'd been reminded of in the last year. When they called her name, she stood carefully so she wouldn't wake Milo. His tiny fingers clung to her collar as she entered the courtroom. Judge Ellis saw her the moment she walked in. Tired eyes, shoes 2 sizes too big, a winter jacket that had clearly come from a donation bin, and the face of a woman trying not to look terrified. The courtroom clerk asked if she needed a moment. She shook her head. Judge Ellis looked at the file, then looked back at her. "Miss Carter," she said softly, "I'd like to speak with you. Just the two of us. Off the record." Whispers rippled through the courtroom, but no one protested. In a side room with the door slightly ajar, Judge Ellis sat across from her at a round table. No robe, no gavel, just eye to eye. "Tell me about Milo," she asked. Celeste hesitated. "He likes trucks," she whispered, "and grilled cheese. He knows the alphabet song. He sings it wrong, but he knows it." The judge smiled. "And bedtime." Celeste blinked, confused. "He sleeps best when I read to him. I don't have a lot of books, so I just make up stories." Judge Ellis leaned forward. "You love him?" "More than anything." She nodded. Back in the courtroom, the ruling came swift. Custody remained with Celeste, but not without support. Judge Ellis connected her with a housing program that prioritized single working mothers, arranged weekly check-ins not with case officers, but with parenting mentors, and donated an entire box of children's books to her directly from her chambers. Later that month, Milo started daycare. Celeste started working the front desk at a clinic downtown. They came back to court one day, not because they had to, but because Milo wanted to show the judge the fire truck he'd drawn in crayon. Judge Ellis hung it next to her diplomas, not for decoration, but as a reminder, because sometimes the right judgment isn't separation. It's solidarity. Judge Ellis never wanted a farewell ceremony. She had been on the bench for over 30 years. No scandals, no books, no social media, just case after case, day after day, with one consistent principle: listen, then decide. But when the news broke that she was retiring, people didn't ask permission. They just showed up. The gallery overflowed, not with lawyers or politicians, but with people who had once stood in her courtroom scared, broken, or invisible, and walked out feeling something they hadn't felt in years: seen. There were no marble plaques, no champagne toasts, just a folding chair, a simple podium, and a judge sitting quietly in the front row, still holding her morning coffee in a paper cup. The first to speak was a young woman in a crisp blazer. She introduced herself as Ava Evans, the girl with the broken backpack. Now she was finishing law school, applying to be a public defender. Judge Ellis didn't just keep me out of jail, she said. She gave me a reason to believe I belong somewhere other than a statistic. Next came Henry Watkins, leaner now, walking with a cane, but proud. I brought her tomatoes every summer after that day, he said, because when someone plants dignity in your life, the least you can do is bring them something homegrown. Laughter, applause, and then a small boy approached the podium, standing on his toes to reach the mic. He held up a crayon drawing, a woman in a robe standing next to a smiling stick figure in red boots. I made this for her, he said, because she helped my mommy keep me. Celeste stood in the back, tears streaming down her face. When it was Judge Ellis's turn to speak, she didn't say much. She never did. She just stood, looked at the crowd and said, I wasn't here to fix lives. I just tried not to break them any further. She paused, then added, the law may be blind, but it doesn't have to be deaf. Then she stepped down from the bench for the last time. But before she could leave, a young woman in a courthouse uniform ran up and handed her something. A wooden gavel, hand-carved by a boy from the youth center. On the handle, one word was burned into the grain, kindness. Judge Ellis smiled, closed her hand around the gavel, then held it up for a moment. Not in victory, but in quiet defiance of a system that forgot it was built for people. And as she walked out of that courtroom, people didn't stand because she was powerful. They stood because she had made them feel like they were.